Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cope Life Nation show. I'm your host, Dr. Charleston Gaines. I'm back again, and I'm so excited. Today, we're going to get into a touchy subject that's personal for me, just based on a lot of things that I've done in my career. And also, it's important to me because my guest is a very good friend of mine. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about sexual assault, and we're going to talk about post traumatic growth and how running an Ironman has anything to do with that at all. And if you're not familiar with an Ironman is swimming about 2.5 miles, riding your bike for about 112 miles, and then running a marathon. And if you're like me, you've actually never done it. I could not imagine doing that. I also could not imagine the work and the effort that it takes to survive something as traumatic like sexual assault. I know that there are so many people who have experienced this trauma in their lives. Recent research has shown that 1 in 4 women have experienced sexual assault prior to the age of 18, and about 1 in 6 men. So, sexual assault is very prevalent in our communities, in our nation. We know people who have been sexually assaulted. Maybe no one has spoken to you about it. Maybe you can't name someone who's been sexually assaulted, but I assure you that there are people in your life who have experienced this trauma. And it has impacted you whether you realize it or not. Sexual assault is a real thing. And understand when I say sexual assault, that includes rape, but it also includes things like hazing and bullying, things of a sexual nature that maybe not results in a completed rape, but there are lots of different kinds of sexual abuse that people go through. And as common as that is, one thing that is uncommon from my perspective is to find someone who turned their trauma into triumph, like my guest tonight, Annemarie LeBohn. She's absolutely phenomenal. She's incredible. I can't wait to share her story with you guys. She is a TEDx speaker, sexual assault survivor, an international speaker and trainer who I'm so fortunate that she's able to carve time out for us tonight because she's been speaking at multiple military bases over the last few weeks and months. I've actually known her for several years. And so the first time I became aware of her sharing her experiences and making an impact on military bases was in 2018. That's how long I've known her, how long I've known her to do this work. Understand that she's not just someone that gets up there and tells her story. She's going to talk about resilience. She's going to talk about post traumatic growth. And she is a true professional. She actually provides continuing education credits to other mental health professionals as part of them ensuring that they can remain professionals so that they can remain certified. She's the real deal. I'm not going to hesitate anymore. I'm going to bring her on stage. Thank you very much for joining me, Annemarie.
Hello. Great to
Hello.
be here. Absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you for the conversation.
I'm so glad you're here. We were speaking earlier, and I don't remember, but you were just providing some training and some inspiration at some other locations recently. Where were you at? Who were you serving?
Just recently in the last month, you mean?
Yes.
Let's see. I was at Moffett Air Force Base in California, and then Fort Benning in Georgia, Fort Riley in Kansas, and Fort Polk in Louisiana, and then soon I'm heading off to Fort Gordon, back in Georgia.
Very nice, very nice. That is awesome. I absolutely love it because I've done a lot of work in the sexual assault prevention field for multiple services: Air Force, the Army, the Navy. And I was actually employed by the Navy when we met.
Yes. Yeah. You were
And
very helpful to me. Very helpful. It helped me better understand how the system works, what I needed to do. You gave me some great guidance, and I'm always thankful for that.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And And one reason why I put in the effort to help you is because I know the impact that you make. And so it's as much as I wanted to help you, I'm also helping everyone that needs to hear your story. And so I'm grateful that I could help you then, and I'm grateful that I have you now on the show. One question I want to ask you before we jump into, we talked earlier about how this conversation is going to go. But before we get into that, what I want to ask you, because you've been speaking on more military bases, how important is it that these conversations are had on military bases, especially given some of the things we've seen in the news the last couple of years?
It is vital that these conversations are had not just in military bases, but at, or even around the dinner table with family. Anytime you can have a conversation like this and engage in an open, respectful dialogue to gain understanding, to gain perspective, it does a world of good. And, the thing that I appreciate about the military, admittedly, and I think everyone in the military would admit to this, is that they were kind of late to the game regarding trying to find ways to prevent sexual assault. But they have surpassed any other industry that I could think of, any other organization that I know of regarding their efforts to find ways to prevent not just sexual assault, but violence in general, drug and alcohol abuse, domestic violence, suicide. And I'm so proud of the organization, of the people that I work with, for their efforts to try and find ways to prevent this violence and to find resources that's helpful for anyone that has gone through this type of trauma.
I appreciate that, and I completely agree with you on when you say it's a conversation that should be had, at dinner tables in multiple communities. I always say that people need to know where you stand. And so, for example, people know that I do not tolerate sexism, discrimination, rape jokes aren't funny around me, and they know that. And that's a lot of the proactive prevention that I'm putting out there for people just to understand my circle, my space does not accept or tolerate sexual assault. But for you, what I really want to dig into, just to really jump off, is you. Gonna kind of switch gears here. You,
Okay.
as part of your post traumatic growth, as part of your healing, understand that healing is a journey. It's not something you do overnight. You competed in an Ironman competition.
Yes.
So, and to me, that is so phenomenal, right? When some people say face your fears, this isn't like facing your fears, right? Facing your fears is like you've decided to go ahead and find a way to get the spider out the house.
Yeah.
Like that's facing your fear. This is a whole new level. So before we even get into the Iron Man itself, can you talk to me about your mindset, your level of confidence, or even self-esteem as you made the decision to do the Ironman and began the training process?
Charleston, that's such a great question. And there's so many different ways that we could go in this conversation because when I knew I was going to do this race for 10 years, my instinct kept telling me to do it, do it, do it. And I kept putting it off because it is a daunting task. It's considered the world's toughest one day endurance sport. And I'm a solid swimmer, I'm a decent cyclist, and I'm a terrible runner. I'm so slow, sloppy, terrible form. I would rather walk. And I didn't know anyone who had done this race. I didn't have the finances to do it. I didn't know how to change a flat tire. And in the Ironman, there's four different triathlons. There's a sprint, Olympic, a half Ironman, and a full. The full is 140.3 miles. And in this race, the full, you can't do it as a relay team, and you have to be prepared for everything that comes your way. Meaning, if I am on the bike and I get a flat, and you're a spectator and you see me and you get up to help me, I would be disqualified. If I'm on the run and I'm hungry or cold and you give me a cookie or a jacket, I would be disqualified. If I fall down and you pick me up, I am disqualified. I have to be prepared for everything that comes my way for this race. I can't get help from people that are other racers, other athletes. I can get help from race organizers, but you train for this race for a year, and on race day, yes, there's wonderful, wonderful other athletes that I'm competing with, but chances are they're not going to stop and help me fix a flat tire. So I really
Right.
have to, yeah, and I wouldn't blame them. I wouldn't do it. I would, depending, but you know, I would probably, it wouldn't surprise me if I said I'm going to keep going.
Right. Right.
So the mindset is so different. When I signed up, I've always been a relatively confident person, but because of being assaulted, I also had a lot of negative thoughts, negative beliefs that I couldn't do it, especially something that seemed impossible. And without having any kind of guidance, anybody else in my circle that had done it, it was such a daunting task. I just had a lot of self doubt. And one person told me that the race is more mental than it is physical. And when I heard that, that was the deciding factor for me to take it on. And it wasn't so much the physical side, because I've always been a very athletic person, and I had some confidence that I could do it. But when I heard that it was more mental, I kept thinking, shoot, it's hard enough for me to go 5 minutes without a negative thought. Is it possible to do the entire race without a negative thought? So that really was there's three goals. One is, at the time I was 49, can I turn my raggedy 49-year-old body into an Ironman? Is that possible? And then I wanted to know, could I do the entire race without getting into the medical tent? But most important, I wanted to do the entire race without a negative thought. I really wanted to enjoy the day, every moment of the day. And so it took a year of disciplining the mind and the body to get ready. And changing the mindset was harder than changing the body. So there's
You
a
know,
lot to go with.
you say that, and I believe so many people can relate, and so many people know exactly what you're saying,
Yeah.
but we haven't applied those concepts to an Ironman. We haven't applied those concepts to something that we train for a year. And I'll give you an example. For me, is finishing my PhD, putting in the work consistently. However, um, I did have help. I had a lot of help. And when you do an Ironman, you can't take a break for a couple days. You do the bike. You're like, oh, I'm gonna do the marathon on Saturday because I'm tired. Like, so, even in my academic pursuits, yeah, I took a break when I wanted to, and I asked for help when I wanted to. And so for me, I'm kind of wondering about the training aspect of it, because when you're training, I believe because I haven't done it. I believe there's so many opportunities to quit, or to ask for help, or to make excuses for yourself. There's so many opportunities to say, I'm good. I don't need this. It's not worth it. And so, how does that mental training look when you have those thoughts and those challenges?
You need a grocery list of resources to go to, really. And I remember the very first time I did a training run, I didn't even go an eighth of a mile, and I stopped. And I'm puffing and puffing, and I'm wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to run a full marathon after swimming 2.4 miles and riding a bike 112 miles? I couldn't figure out, how am I going to do that? And it starts with these macro goals, whether it's, of course, that applies to each of the sport. And then it applies to other things. For example, um, I had a hard time understanding my triggers that would make me think negative thoughts. And I realized it one day when I was riding, I don't know, I think it was 100 miles. And I was, I was riding in a lot of wind. And I just remember somewhere around mile 50 being completely pissed off. And I had to stop and I had to analyze something just for 5 minutes. You know, I don't want to stay off the bike very long when you're doing that kind of a ride because you get your muscles cold. But I started trying to backpedal and backpedaling and backpedaling. And I started realizing, wow, I'm angry at the wind. And then I started trying to figure out, well, why am I angry at the wind? And I realized, well, the wind, this type of pressure that I was having, it was pulling me back and keeping me from going forward, doing things, was similar to the same feelings that I had regarding when I was being stalked by somebody, that I was being chased and pushed in a spot I didn't want to go. And the feelings were similar. And when I started realizing my triggers, that then gave me power because I could either stay in that thought process, that really negative thought process, or I could choose something positive. And I started thinking of things that were I was grateful for. So whenever I became negative, and it didn't matter what was going on with swim, bike, or run, I started thinking immediately of something positive and something I was grateful for, and that gave me a lot of power. Other things that I did is I learned the importance of rest. Of course, it's very physical. You need physical rest, but then I realized the mental rest is just as important. And that downtime let me kind of regroup and reprocess things. I had a hard time asking for help. Very difficult to say, I need help. But I discovered it's really easy to say, I need an attitude adjustment. So when I'm training my training buddies, they knew whenever I said I need an attitude adjustment that it was time for us to stop whatever we were doing, just have a little breather, regroup, and they would in turn ask me questions. How am I doing? Am I hungry? Am I? Because I also have hypoglycemic, so my blood sugar levels really fluctuate. You know, and so they'd ask if I needed some electrolytes or different something to eat, or do I need to stretch, or are my shoulders and whatever it was. We just would check in with each other. And the other thing that really made a difference is when I signed up, I thought I was just going to do it myself. So, but then after maybe about 2.5 months, I realized these long rides, these long runs, because you start off with maybe riding 20 miles, and then you get to 30 miles, and you get to 40 miles. And by the time you get to around, 45, 50 miles, it's nice if you can do it with somebody else. And I found every once in a while I would join a group, and whenever I had people that I was riding with, I was more engaging. I was pushing myself farther, pushing myself harder, and I was a better cyclist as opposed to when I was by myself because then I could say, "Oh, I'm done for the day." They would help me push me on. And these groups of people that I trained with, two in particular, there's a gal named Angela and then a guy named Jose. Whenever we would ride together, they were really great at helping me with the support system, of pushing me further, of helping me stay in a positive mindset. And it made a huge difference when I found support. And that applies to whether I'm dealing with my mindset because of something traumatic or whether my mindset and dealing with an Ironman race. They would help me if I got a flat, they would support me. And there's just, they were just invaluable to me in my training process.
I love it. I love it so much because the way you're describing your training process really is how life is.
Hmm.
I mean, it's almost like it's an analogy for all of life. There's certain parts where you have your self doubt, and you actually have, sometimes we'll tell ourselves, I actually have a really good reason to quit. No one will judge me. It's okay. And you can have these good reasons to quit. And then sometimes you're just mad at something that makes no sense. And then there's other times where you have the support. And what happens is you kind of find out that you're the same person in all of these situations. Your level of strength, your level of like your values, what's important to you. It's you're the same person, and you just have to decide, yeah, I'm the same person, but in this moment, me, being who I am can decide to quit now or not.
Yes.
And all of life is like that. And what you did was you took your anger, your negative thoughts, your support, everything in between, and you said, I'm going to pedal a little bit longer. I have a goal. I've made a decision. I'm going to run a little bit further today.
Yes.
And I think that's so powerful and such an analogy for life just in general.
It is.
And so can you tell me about a time? Well, I want to take it up to race day now. So
Okay.
you did all that training,
Hmm.
and then you're at the beginning. You're about to start.
Yeah.
What was your mindset? Maybe 30 minutes before, 90 seconds before, like I'm about to do it. How did that feel? And as far as your mindset, positive, negative, confident, insecure, what was going on?
Wow, so many different things are going on, especially for that very first race. But there were two things that happened that really made a difference to kind of help me ground myself. And the first was you get to the race, you get to what they call T1, which is where your bike is. You have T1, T2, transition one, transition two, transition one, where you check your bike, you make sure everything's there. This is when you get out of the water, you go to this transition, you get your bike and you go, right? There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's what's happening. So I had gotten to this location probably 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. It's just chaos. It's dark. Loud music is playing. And all of a sudden, I spotted at that time, she was the oldest Ironman and she was 85. And she's a Catholic nun. And she has done, at that point, she had done 30 Ironmans. And
Wow.
I'm walking around and I'm really frantic and I'm checking my tires 2 or 3 times and checking my food 2 or 3 times. I want to make sure my bag is where it is, my helmet is where it is. And I see her kind of walking, and a couple of people came up to her and they did the sign of the cross, and you can tell that they were asking her for a prayer or something. But she was so calm. She was so relaxed. And I remember thinking, she's done 30 of them. She's 85 years old. And I just took on that same kind of a personality. I thought, I want to be calm. This is just an everyday thing that we're going to do. This is going to be a fun day. And just seeing her calmed me down, calmed my nerves down. And then the other thing that happened was uh, the way it worked at that particular point, there was this boardwalk that we would jump about 3 feet down into the water below, and it was still dark. The water temperature was 61 degrees. And this is it. Once you jump off the boardwalk into the water, there's no turning around. You're there. And I stood there for a good 5 minutes before jumping in, just taking it in, experiencing it, just the daunting task that was ahead of me. And over the loudspeaker, the announcer yells, "Jump in! You're avoiding the inevitable." And I thought, well, that's it right there. That's it. So I did my own sign of the cross and jumped on in, and the water cooled my thoughts, cooled my mind, got into position, and I thought, okay, this is it. Just have a good time. Swim, bike, and run. What a great day. That's all I have to do is swim, bike, run. And those two moments really kind of calmed everything down, put everything in perspective, and off I went.
I love it. I absolutely love it. When you talk about seeing the nun and then how that impacts your mindset in the moment, I think that's so very important because that says to me that we never know who's looking. We never know who's watching. We never know who we're going to impact. And I say the same thing about you speaking on stage.
Yeah.
Your impact is immeasurable. And
Wow.
so when you see her relax and you're just thinking, okay, I'm not her, I'm not trying to be her. However, I know that all of my nerves and my stress response in this moment are not required. I can turn it down. And
Yeah.
so what you said, even the jumping in the water and the way that the cold water kind of calmed your thoughts, it's the mind body connection, because you could not have jumped in and began the swimming if your thoughts and your body were disconnected. You had to work as a singular unit. It sounds kind of bad, I guess, but your mind and body had to work together.
Mind, body, and spirit. Your
Yes.
body's made of the mind, body, and spirit. And you sure could if it's not connected. I mean, if they're all in two different ways, you could do it, but it was a lot more difficult and it's a little bit more chaotic. And that's where mistakes happen. I'm sad to say that there have been people that have died in the Ironman, and there have been a few that have died in the water because they're so anxious. They have heart attacks.
Wow.
And the lesson for me when I think about them is, to you can control it. You can control your breath. You can control these things, and it's not easy, not easy, but you can control them if you work at it. And you want to stay as level-headed, as calm as you can, be focused on what's at hand, what you have to do, and enjoy the rest.
You
Yeah.
say enjoy the rest. I think about how you said some people lost their lives,
Yes.
and you say enjoy the rest. And to me, that speaks on perspective. As hard as it sounds to swim that far, not even thinking about the biking and the running, just the swimming, just to swim that far, and to think about what it takes to have the perspective that this is an opportunity. I'm grateful that I'm able to swim this far.
Yep.
That perspective is very powerful, because when you say that, it makes me think about how a lot of people don't recognize they can choose their perspective, they can choose their mindset, they can choose how they look at whatever challenges or opportunities are in front of them. And so you said, let me enjoy this. You didn't say, oh my goodness, this is so hard. As you were swimming, you weren't thinking, how much further do I have to go? This sucks. You can choose your perspective and mindset. So I really appreciate you saying that.
But
And I think that alone is a powerful lesson for anyone to take with them if they get nothing else out of it.
oh, it's true. I will say that those thoughts that you were just expressing, I did have many of them when I was training. There's
Yes.
many days that I wanted to quit where I'm physically exhausted, where I can't believe I have the energy to do another mile, another stroke, whatever it might be. And it's during that time is when you really want to start learning how to discipline the mindset, because there's four different stages of triathlons, as I mentioned. So if I am planning to do a full Ironman, but I only train for a sprint, I'm going to be struggling. So part of the success really comes for training for the challenge, whatever that challenge might be, and preparing for it.
So I want to switch gears here, because what you just said, the training, the preparing for what's coming up, and your mindset, the opportunities to quit. I can take those same concepts and I can apply them to how you respond to getting over trauma and the process of healing after the trauma that you experienced. And so I kind of want to know, I want to know about the event, but I like to tell people that we only need to know what you're willing to share. I'm not going to ask anything too personal. This is your life, and you share as much or as little as you want about the event.
Okay. So wait to you. Well, let's start it off this way. In regards to my event, it was really lasted about 4 years. And it
Wow.
happened at a time where there was no such thing as an 800 rape hotline, locally to globally. Was not in, so there was no resources like what the military provides. There was no place for me to go except for the church if I wanted to try to get some sort of guidance or counseling or advice. uh, yes, there were counselors. There were, I could go to a psychologist, but after it happened, um, instantly, I want to say, I mean, instantly, let's just say within 5 to 10 minutes of it happening, I started putting blame on myself because even though I did not know this person, we were both at a party together. There was a number of us that spent the night at this house because we had drank too much. This was a big celebration for us, and but I really didn't know who he was. He was new to my circle of friends, and I was raised in a way where a belief system where you were supposed to save yourself until you got married. And I was also raised in an environment where it was very beautiful and loving and you could even say sheltered. We weren't allowed to watch any type of a program on television that was violence, or at least that my parents perceived that was violent. And so I had no concept of processing what had happened. I did not know anybody in my life that had gone through anything that was violent or traumatic. Well, I shouldn't say that. We had some traumatic things that had happened in our family, like a wildfire that came through and burnt our house, and we were told we had 5 minutes to get out. So yes, I had that kind of trauma. I had trauma of death, but trauma that was caused from one person onto another, no. I had no idea what that was. I didn't even know it existed. And so because I was still buzzed when it had happened and a number of other factors, I believe that it was my fault on some level. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't justify the fact that I had been drinking earlier in the night and that I was still buzzed. And because of that, I was filled with shame, was filled with guilt. I was raised, like I said, in a very loving environment, but girls were seen and not heard. So I didn't want to make a scene of this event. And I did tell somebody who suggested something that I thought sounded good. They said, "Oh, just stay away from this guy." And that's what I did. Now, it's a couple things that were going on. First, by not speaking up and saying something, that by not seeking justice, by not filing a police report, those things told him that he could get away with it.
Yes.
The other thing that had happened is by not speaking about it, my circle of friends and my family did not know that this person was an evil being. And they did not know to protect me. They did not know that if he was at a party that I was at, that he should be kicked out, or I should leave, or to encircle me. So in my mind, a couple things happened. One is I physically felt like I didn't fight hard enough for protecting myself. Two is I didn't feel like I protected myself with justice, with my circle of friends. So I didn't fight for my value of my life. So there's a number of things that had happened immediately within 24 hours that told him he could get away with it and told me I did not have value.
See, when you say that, one of the things that I think about is when we're talking about like self blame and the guilt and the shame that comes with it. When you're in your head that way, there's no counter argument,
No, there isn't any counter argument. Yes.
right? You're alone with your thoughts. No one is there to tell you that you're wrong. And I started this show talking about the number of people who are sexually assaulted,
Mhm.
but at that time you didn't know those numbers. You couldn't go online and go to this website and say, oh, this is happening for so long, even my first many years in the military, even earlier part of, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't know it was really a problem. And so you're in a situation where you felt isolated. And then I think about your mindset. You said that you didn't do enough to protect yourself, but then you mentioned going forward because you didn't let people know that certain protective factors were not put in place, such as you not being in the same place as him, this person not being invited, or you not being there. And when you say that, I think of the mind shift, just the way that you viewed social gatherings. You look at it now as, am I protected? Am I safe? And it really just impacts the way that you interact with other people. And so, can you kind of talk about maybe how that impacted just your relationships, whether it was lifelong friends or how it impacted you meeting new people, just your perspective of people in general?
There's many, everyone deals with trauma differently. There's no rule book for the most part, right, on how to deal with it. Um, and in sexual assault, some people become promiscuous. Some people become heavy and unhealthy because they see their body as this ugly being that attracted that trauma to them. Um, some people mask it through drugs and alcohol or smoking or whatever it might be. And I became a runner, meaning I didn't want to deal with anything that was painful or confrontational. Didn't matter what the subject was. So if I went to a party and he was there, I would run, I would leave. And that isolated me from my family and friends. It also impacted relationships that I had. I didn't really have that many successful, healthy, personal relationships. Sure, I got married, and I had married a wonderful man, absolutely wonderful man. But he wasn't the right man for me. He was a man that was providing more protection than love, and that's not a right reason to get married. It's because you feel protected. You should marry for love. So there's a number of mistakes that I made in regards to the relationships that I had with my family and my friends, and even impacted work. Um, I would be fine in a job, but if I felt um, if somebody was flirting with me or if I felt uncomfortable, my choice was to leave that job and find another one. And it's estimated that a person will lose about $150,000 in income throughout their life because of this type of job hopping, or they have to take time off because of counseling or for a number of reasons. And I see that finances is a trickle down effect for me as well. I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went off. Yeah.
You definitely answered it. It impacted so many parts of your life, but one thing that struck me is when you talked about certain events as mistakes. And
Hmm.
when you say that, like even talking about marrying the wrong person and certain other things, what I think of, and I say this from the outside looking in because I haven't walked in your shoes, but when I hear that, I think you may think of it as a mistake, but were you not doing the best that you could?
Yes. It's funny that you say this. So I don't know if this is a direction you want to go, but I'm going to go in this.
Let's do
I'm
it.
going to share a couple of things. So I remember it came a point where I felt like I had made so many bad choices because of that I couldn't trust myself. And one of the things I prayed for a long time was wisdom. And I remember this one time going to a church and feeling so overwhelmed with the things that had happened in my life and where I was, and not really having a good direction on how I was going to move forward. And I remember doing something that I thought was really rather disrespectful, but I laid down on a pew because I just literally didn't have the energy to sit and contemplate life. And I just wanted to lay down and rest. And I remember looking at the cross and seeing Jesus hanging there. And I'm not trying to be religious or sway anyone, but this is just my experience. And thinking, it's been said that Jesus experienced every emotion of life. Whether you see him as a prophet or the Son of God or just as a man, we can all agree that at that particular moment, he was tortured in life, as he's hanging on the cross. And at that moment, I was thinking he must have been pissed off. You know, Here he had
Right.
supposedly done all of these wonderful things, miraculous things. And even if he's just a man, if that's what you want to see him as a man, he was tortured. And probably, I thought he must have been pissed off because, of all the things he had done, this is how he found his death. And then I thought about the last things that he said. Forgive them, they know not what they do. And it's not so much that I focused on the forgive them, but it was more on they know not what they do. And all of a sudden I realized my mindset, I married this person, I did this, I did that, I did these things because I wasn't in my right mindset.
Right.
And that was really kind of the beginning of me saying, well, wait a minute. If all of that had not happened to me, what would my mindset look like? Where would I be living? Would I be married? Where would I be focusing my mind? Would it be on this guy that had done these horrific things to me because he had stalked me over the 4 years, raped me a second time by using a drug that paralyzes someone? And he also had incorporated something that I did not know this term until years later. It's called non-fatal strangulation, where the perpetrator really doesn't want to kill the victim, but they want to control them even their last breath. And so I realized because of all of those crazy things that had happened, because I didn't seek justice, I didn't fight for my rights, I didn't, all of this grocery list of bad choices. I am in no way, blaming myself for the assaults, for the stalking, for all of these things that he had done. But I realized I had to take responsibility for marrying the wrong man, or and doing these other things that I was not in my right mindset. I forgive them; they know not what they do. And when I started taking responsibility for my actions, for my life, for my mindset, when I started seeking who would I be if all of those things hadn't happened to me, I wanted to know who that person would be. And so that then everything started changing, for the better in my life.
I love that. I love that there's a seminal moment where you recognize what was in your control and what was not in your control. And it sounds to me like you got to a point where you're just kind of tired of the self judgment. And what I want to know, and I want to ask you this, and then I want to kind of transition to, back to the Ironman and post traumatic growth. So
Oh,
that's coming. That's coming.
okay.
But my question right now is, from that point, lying on the pew, recognizing that you need to take responsibility for this aspect of your life, from that point to even making the decision to do an Ironman, can you talk about the growth of your self worth and recognizing your real value as just as a human being?
The process of it, the process of learning that, yeah,
Yes.
there was, um, I remember one of the first things that had happened when I woke up from a nightmare. And my husband found me later in that day crying, you know, and he said, "You got to go to counseling because I can't help you anymore." And I remember being pissed off. Like he's supposed to be my knight in shining armor. He's supposed to fix all my problems. And I realized, no, if I want happiness, I have to find happiness. So I went to counseling, but that wasn't even easy. The first time I went to a counselor, the counselor wanted to compare her rape to mine. That's not
Wow.
counselor. Yeah, but that was
Wow,
you know,
that's crazy.
it is crazy, but that was where it was. There really weren't a lot of people talking about rape
Right.
at that time, and so then the second person I went to couldn't look at me in the eye when I was talking, and I thought, well, if he can't face my problems, how am I going to face them? So the third counselor I went to was the right one, and I remember distinctly her saying to me as I sat with her that first day, everything happens in due time, like a leaf falling from a tree.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now it was my turn to be. And I thought, what does that mean to be? So that was my journey, was the beginning of my journey. So the lessons there is don't give up. If you don't find the right support system, find somebody else, and if that's not the case, keep looking until you find the right support system. And then the journey of discovering this post traumatic growth really started with the counseling. So I always want to tell people, don't be afraid to go find counseling because it's really a sign of you taking responsibility for your life. What I learned from Ironman is that the strongest muscle in the body is not the glutes or whatever it might be, it is the brain. And
Yes.
it's the muscle that is least, exercised. And when you go to counseling, it's a way of you exercising your brain. It's a way of you finding ways to process something that you're having a hard time processing on your own. It's a way of you showing that you're taking responsibility for your life. It was realized in the 1980s, a scientist realized for the first time that trauma, PTSD, happens from an event outside the body. Up until the 1980s, people were looked at as being weak if they had PTSD, when in reality, it was really something that happened outside the body. So to this day, though, people see themselves as being weak if they want to go to counseling, when in reality, that's not. It's a sign of strength
Definitely. Definitely.
to
You know,
find.
you say that, and no, we've got a few minutes left, and you say that, and so what I wanted to do was bring up that you mentioned when we were speaking earlier 10 things that you learned from the Ironman about post traumatic growth.
Yes.
And I really just wanted to hear that and to give you the opportunity to share.
Oh, yes. Well, the first one, number one, is it doesn't matter how old you are, you're never too old to become who you're meant to be.
Yes,
Yeah. And second one is that you want to set micro and macro goals. And then you want to assess them as time goes on, and then assess them, readjust them as needed. And then you want to visualize those goals and visualize them, incorporate all your senses with them. So for the Ironman, the micro and the macro goals is one visual. The macro is finishing, right, crossing the finish line, but the micro one is running from an eighth of a mile to 1 mile to 2 miles to 3 miles and building as I go. And then you have to be passionate about it, because if you're not passionate, you're just going to be, your mind, body, spirit is just going to be screaming in pain. It'll be uncomfortable and unpleasant the entire way. So the passion for this new life, this new taking on this challenge, has to be greater than the pain that you're going to endure or the pain that you are at in your current life, because it's easy to kind of get stuck and wallow in a current uncomfortable situation. So your passion for growth has to be better than that. Um, I mentioned it before, you want to find your support. When I first did my first race, I didn't know anyone, and no one in my family and my friends had ever done anything like this. So I joined triathlon clubs, and I found people that were doing something similar or that had done it, and gave me some wonderful, wonderful support system, and that made a huge difference in my life for racing, but just everyday living is the support system that I had. Um, I had to become mindful of the triggers. The triggers made a huge difference because once I saw something that was making me think negative, then I had the power to choose. And we talked a little bit about that. But once I became mindful of the positive and negative things in my life, it also made a huge difference. That was and I learned that really through racing Ironman. Um, you want to recover. We talked about the rest of the mind and the body and the importance of that. And that took me a long time because I just wanted to go full board training. And then after a month of everyday training, I had to take a break. I had to rest for 2 days. And the whole time I was feeling guilty of that recovery. But then when I came back at it, I found that my running was stronger and I could go farther. So I realized that it was vital for that rest for the mind and the body, but also not to feel guilty about it. That was a sign of growth that I was doing to let myself relax. Um, Another one. This might sound silly, but it's sing. And I found it important. And I'm not a good singer. I sing off key, but there's a great benefit of music. Science has discovered this as well, in the recovery of the mindset of singing and being around arts. And so, a good day for me would be, of course, singing as I'm riding and trying to come up with songs that I could sing. In fact, I created a bike song whenever I was dealing with wind or dealing with a lot of pain, because on average, I'm a race day, I'm riding, 7 hours on a bike. So it was great to change my mindset and think about something differently. And I could do that through singing. That was a great benefit for me when I realized that. And then to jump in, that I'm avoiding the inevitable, that if I'm listening to my inner voice told me for 10 years to do this race. And it got to the point where I had to listen to it. And once I decided to do it, to jump in, to take it on, then everything changed. Everything kind of fell into place.
I love it. I absolutely love it because everything that you say applies to training for an Ironman, completing an Ironman,
Yeah.
but also the recovery, the post traumatic growth. It's a process. You have to have the right mindset, but don't blame yourself. Don't judge yourself. Take rest when you need to. Find the right support group and jump in. And when we're talking about jumping in regards to post traumatic growth, what you're saying is to take action. You can't sit around and wait. I look at it almost from a physical standpoint, right? Like if you have a severe physical injury, you're not just going to sit there, right? You have a broken leg. Let me just sit here and look at my leg and wait for it to heal. You're going to go take action. You're going to jump into the healing process. But
Mhm.
when it comes to trauma, if you're full of self doubt or blame, it's harder to jump in. You've created your own barrier. But what you've done was you set the example. You set the example. You said, this is how you jump in. It takes people different amounts of effort, different amounts of time, but you jumped in and you completed the Ironman. The training for it is a process that took a year. Getting over trauma took longer, and there's not a finish line with post traumatic growth like an Ironman. I really appreciate you being here. What I want to know, I want to close out with just kind of if there's any other people in organizations, in corporations looking for someone to really combine resilience, mindset, and healing, what do you have to offer? And as I ask you that, I'm going to put your website for everyone to see. Tell us what you're bringing to corporations, and military installations that are looking to approach this subject.
When I first started speaking to the military, they asked me if I could share some thoughts on how to prevent sexual assault. And at that time, some part of me thought that's not possible because the guy that assaulted me, I believe he's just a demon in a number of ways. But I've changed my tune. I believe that there are a number of ways that you can prevent assault. Not 100% of them, but I do believe that you can in regards to setting boundaries. And so the classes that I bring to the military are on a number of different topics that deal with prevention, but also deals with the mindset on the post traumatic forgiveness, on mindfulness, on self care. I also talk about other things that touch on the violence of um, humanity, uh, something that people don't think about, catfishing, and how catfishing is not, it's not illegal to catfish, but it leaves victims in its wake. So there's a number of different topics that all align, positive, negative, about self-help, about growth, you know, um, about ways that you can grow and thrive even because of the trauma.
Mm.
So and those topics like on forgiveness and on mindfulness and on self care are just important to talk about as the topics on prevention and on catfishing, on non fatal strangulation. There's it's a wide conversation, and depending on the need, I'm open to talk about it, especially if it could help anyone in the room.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate you so much being here. You are such an example of resilience, of really fighting for yourself and learning to grow through the trauma and recover. Thank you so much, Annemarie. I appreciate you. Thank you for all of the viewers. And with that, I will say good night. Thank you, Annemarie, and until next time.
All the best.